You're watching the Hostile Takeover podcast.
Sometimes when I'm in Europe, I'm like, well, I paid off the trip, and now I could either stay in the punk house, or, and this is very unpunk of me, or I'm in like this Eastern Hungary, and I could stay in a spa with a natural hot spring, you know. And so I've as I've gotten older, and now I'm in my 40s, I've started to treat my body better, and to not necessarily penny pinch as much as I used to, but yeah.
Hot stone massages are punk as fuck. Like
it's good.
You got to take care of yourself, man.
Got it. I mean, and I'm talking about.
Hey, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining me. Jacob Taves, you are an artist, and you do a lot of other things professionally. But I really want to talk to you about your career in music, how you got started maybe, and a couple of the projects you've been in. Just give the viewers a little bit how you got into the industry and what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm ready.
Let's do it. How did you get into the industry?
How did I get in?
How old were you when you first said I want to fucking do this? This is cool.
I think that it was with the accessibility of electronic music. I mean, a home taping with a combination of free software that you could download and just use on any old computer. It didn't have to be good or fast. I think that was the main thing. So particularly in the 90s, Tracker software, which is like a grid-based system for programming. Uh-huh. And then that was all free, and there was a community that shared samples and stuff like that. And then you just plug your computer output into your Ghetto Blaster and hit record, and you can pass tapes around afterwards. So,
yeah.
Cool. I think that was it. Always music in the family, as far as there was a piano in the house, and I took lessons briefly as a kid. My sister took violin. I played trombone. But it was the electronic music and that accessibility of it that really got me.
Cool. Yeah. So personally, I've never been into the electronic scene. There's been pieces of electronic music that maybe drift over into rock and roll, let's say. And there's some things that I really love about it, and there's the classics Kraftwerk. You can't really call them electronic because they kind of were around before that, but they definitely went into the digital age. But what are the coolest things I like about your music from what you've shown me is there's a wide spectrum of your sounds. I've heard some things that are very laid back, subdued, and ambient even, and then I've heard just some psychotic noise stuff. And tell us about, because your bio says you're a composer and musician, but really you're a composer, a musician, a producer, you're everything. So tell us a little bit about about your work and how it's does the whole spectrum of sound, say.
Well, I mean, I used to, because I mean, in the past, I had been sort of involved in metal bands, and I played in I played electronics and stuff like that. But I was used to get into this kind of funny debate. I mean, it's not so much anymore, but growing up in the prairies and getting into music in the 90s, there's of course lots of that attitude of well, it's not real music to be making electronic music and stuff. Whatever your taste is, I mean, that's just kind of a ridiculous sentiment to say, well, that's not real music. Yeah. If you listen to it, it's clearly music. Yeah. But that attitude was around, and there was sort of this attitude also that you encounter a lot especially in North America around in punk scenes and stuff. And I was always interested in pretty like abrasive and high energy music.
Yeah.
And so, trying to play my first gigs doing this kind of industrial noise cut up stuff, like alongside a lot of sort of punk or even sometimes like screamo bands or metalcore, whatever was popular in the early 2000s. The gigs I could get, and I got shut off often or cut off and kicked out and stuff like that. But yeah. What was I trying to say about getting a little bit sidetracked.
It's fine. It's
Um,
fine.
yeah, you were asking how it. I mean, okay. So there was
Just,
this thing where
just,
people would say this isn't punk. This
yeah,
isn't real
yeah,
music. You're just like a nerd with a computer. And I was like, seriously, dude. I spent like $300 on a secondhand computer. I got headphones and I can do absolutely everything. And your punk band has got like thousands and thousands of dollars invested into it. I took the fucking bus here to play this gig, and you
yeah.
guys had to buy a van that you licensed, all of this stuff, and you're sitting here talking to me about what's punk and what's not. So like to me, I mean, I really, I mean, I've tried to have a pretty much anything goes.
Yeah,
Sometimes I sit down to sketch out things, and I've always worked with samples. I've always been influenced by rap and hip hop production,
yeah.
as well as like music concrete and
Hmm.
avant-garde stuff. And there's huge linkages between that stuff.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, for sure. And so sometimes I just sit down with like my iTunes library and Ableton open, and I'm just dragging and dropping things and cutting and splicing and just seeing what happens. And then it goes through like massive amounts of edits, and then a lot of live performance of chopping up samples live, and then re-editing that afterwards. And then sometimes it just keeps going and going and going, basically. And yeah, I try not to have too much of a dead set goal on what happens in the end.
Cool. So, so on your live sets, when you're doing live sampling as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's right now especially. I basically have a setup, and I'm mostly focusing right now on more free improvisation and
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
sound collage and stuff, and I'm doing some live synced video as well. Not for every show, but it depends. Depends on the situation. I want it to look sharp, so
Yeah.
so I've been a bit picky about where I've been bringing out the video. Right, if
Yeah.
it's like a bar with bad lighting and stuff like that, no one's going to see it. Fuck it. But
Yeah.
yeah, but if it's in a theater with a nice screen, then absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, so
And that kind of ties back to what you were saying about like being in the. I'm gonna make this a two-parter here. For like, I'm
sure.
just gonna comment on with something you said before. The punk scene is like such a fucking shitty thing sometimes when they talk about like what is punk, and like when I look at your work, I like it's more punk than any fucking punk band, you know. And like, well, if anyone just heard your stuff, you wouldn't be like that's punk rock if you heard like a 5-second clip of it. But
Yeah.
if you dive into like who you are and what you're doing, it's punk as fuck. And
Well, you
like,
can put,
so it's just it is to me, and my opinion
yeah, I
doesn't
mean,
mean shit, but
well, no, but I mean, like the very first tour I ever did was just on a month pass with the Greyhound, uh, and you can
there you
put a
go.
sampler in a backpack with
Yeah,
a couple extra pairs of underwear or whatever and some socks, and
yeah,
get on the bus and go. Yeah,
yep.
and I was just even hoofing it, like hiking from the bus station to the venues and stuff like that if I didn't want to bother figuring out what bus to take, what like local bus to take, stuff like that.
Yeah,
And I did that, and then that extended going in throughout Europe as well.
yeah,
Yeah. Um,
yeah. I've done a lot of, not a lot of tour managing, but like a little bit of tour managing for like DJs, and like comedians,
mhm.
on like bigger tours, like festivals and
Yeah.
big theater stuff where they'd need a person to handle logistics and technical stuff. And
Hmm.
it's great. Like I love it because I'm not advancing like a 20-piece band. I'm not
Yeah.
talking about all the technical things. It's like, here's a fucking USB, or here's like a stereo output to run through
Yeah.
front of house. Here's a USB of all the video files to run on the screen, and we're done. And
Yeah.
like it fits in like a little case this big.
Yeah,
And
it's awesome.
and we're touring, like
Yeah.
my last
Yeah.
tour, I had like two gobos that like you insert into a light, and that
Yeah.
it like makes a shape of whatever you want. It was the
Yeah.
artist name in this
Hmm.
case, but that was it. My whole tour kit was like a those two gobos and like a Zoom recorder that I recorded all the shows with, so they can use it for their socials and shit after. And that was
Yeah.
the entire, like it fit in a case this big. I took it around
Yeah.
in my backpack. It was the best.
Why not? I mean, I
Yeah.
just like, yeah, I sometimes I show up for gigs because I still play really eclectic gigs, wherever it's in North America or overseas, and I still go to Europe and take the cheapest bus or the train or whatever I ride share. I
Yeah.
had a ride share once, with I showed up in Berlin to do a ride share, booked online,
Okay.
to go to Augsburg for a gig, and I show up and this guy is pretty ripped. He's pretty beefy, really nice. Shakes my hand, super friendly. Doesn't mind at all that I'm not German, and stuff. He's speaking in good English and stuff for me, and I had a bunch of weed in my bag. Which is something that I should not have done at the time. I made sillier choices in past years necessarily, but I was like, I'm going in Germany. It's not exactly the strictest country in the world for those things, but I didn't really realize that I was also going into Bavaria, which is one of the strictest places for that in that country. But so this guy, he gets me, says, put your stuff in my trunk. So I go open the trunk, and lo and behold, there's a backpack there that says Polizei, like police bag,
Fuck.
like a duffel bag. And so I put my bag in, but people buy that stuff all the time, right? Like you can go buy like an FBI
like
T-shirt and wear it around.
Surplus
And
shit,
so
yeah.
I did not assume that this guy was a cop, right? And
Okay.
then I get in the car and we're going and we're talking, and he's super nice, super friendly dude. And we start to get to that point in the conversation where we're asking what we're doing for a living, and I told him that I was performing in Augsburg, and ride share seemed was a lot more affordable than taking the train. So that thanks for helping me save some cash in the tour budget. And he starts talking about he's on the anti-terrorism squad for the Bavarian police.
Damn.
And we got talking, and then, because I'm a blabbermouth and I have a really hard time not just like wearing it on my sleeve.
Yeah.
We get talking about all sorts of things. He finds out that I'm in Vancouver at the time, and I also said I had a day job in healthcare there. He started talking about. He brought up like the Vancouver approach to drug policy.
Yeah.
And we just started talking about it, and it turned out that this guy had some he agreed with he had some pretty decent ideas.
Mm-hmm.
We even got to talking about like the problem of like right-wing infiltration into police forces, and he was like, well, yeah, I'm not a street cop, like I'm an anti-terrorism guy, and I the biggest, I'll tell you right now, the biggest concern in Germany is the right-wing racist neo-Nazi groups. And you saw that recently. There was like a coup attempt or whatever. The cops in Germany busted all these folks. Maybe that guy that I got.
I thought you were talking about here in Canada. I'm like, yeah.
No, there was. There was in Germany, right?
Yeah,
recently.
Okay. I didn't hear about that.
Okay, if you look it up, maybe that guy I got a ride from, maybe he was involved in that. I'm not sure, but turned out he was a pretty chill dude.
Cool.
Never, of course, brought up the fact that I only had like 3 or 4 grams of weed, maybe maximum.
Yeah.
In
enough to fuck your life over in certain countries.
Yeah, certain countries. Enough to get like sent home from most countries I was traveling through.
Yeah.
Not really enough to mess my life up too much, but yeah.
That's hilarious.
Dumb choice, but yeah, there you go. I had a
That's
ride share from a cop, so those are
that's
some
great. That's so great. I got picked up by a cop once too. Kind of similar situation coming from the
Oh yeah,
Toronto airport. Yeah, I got picked up
nice.
by a cop who I thought was helping me out. Then he's like, "I got to check your bag before I give you a ride." I was like, "All right, here we go." So,
Oh wow.
yeah, so that was funny, but
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
so yeah, you've been all over the place. Obviously, you've been touring the world. You tell us a little bit about, because what I thought was kind of cool, you play these little DIY shows that you put together yourself, or like maybe some just like close friends, and it's very, you know, logistically very kind of simple to do. It's like, I'm gonna come here, we're gonna get like 50 people in a
Hmm.
room, 10 people in a whatever. But
Hmm.
you're also playing theaters,
Yeah,
and
I've
like
played bigger and
well put
smaller. Yeah,
together shows.
yeah.
Just chat about that, and like, do you have you like bounced back and forth? You obviously bounce back and forth between them, and
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, I guess it's sort of after touring and doing a lot of the grind of just the smaller
yeah,
shows, getting sort of reputation and better contacts in certain places. It's really like a lot of the more recent touring, and I haven't been on the road since before the pandemic, but
okay,
more recent touring years were all about like getting a couple of bigger gigs that had sort of budgets, whether it be because it's a festival or maybe it's an arts organization that has some kind of like grant budget or something
hmm
like that. And then that anchors the tour, and
yeah,
okay, I'm going to be in Hamburg for these days, and I have this chunk of money. And if I get a couple of more gigs like that, I can pay off the flight, I can pay off all the base costs, and then the rest of the money is either in my pocket or have fun with it. And one of the problems with my dual career of having music on one side and working, in other jobs is that sometimes when I'm in Europe, I'm like, well, I paid off the trip, and now I could either stay in the punk house or, and this is very unpunk of me, or I'm in like this Eastern Hungary and I could stay in a spa with a
yeah,
natural hot spring,
yeah,
And so I've
yeah,
as I've gotten older and now I'm
yeah,
in my 40s,
yeah,
I've started to treat my body better, and to not necessarily penny pinch as
yeah.
much as I used to, but yeah.
Hot stone massages are punk as fuck. You know, like,
It's good
you
to
got to
it's
take
good
care
to
of yourself, man.
you got it. I mean, and I'm also, but I'm talking about doing that like maybe like once a week in like a
Yeah,
2 month grind of like
yeah,
sleeping. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And just yeah, I promised myself that I would be nicer to myself after I came home with like back problems and stuff like
yeah,
that from hauling. Yeah, I mean, a sampler in a backpack is still a lot less than hauling an amp in and out of like an
yeah,
up and down stairs. But when
yeah.
you're taking the buses and you're walking around everywhere with it, it adds up. It
Yeah.
adds up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're preaching to the choir, as they say, like, explaining, you know, taking care of yourself a little bit after being on the road for so long. It's a super important thing that a lot of
yeah.
people, especially like newer artists who haven't really toured before, like,
Mm,
they're like, "Oh yeah, let's go on tour. It'll be awesome. We get to travel around." And but when you're on the road, you're not traveling. You're working, and
hmm.
it's a grind, and
Yeah,
to take care of yourself through it is super important.
I
You can't.
actually
It's just
often have.
not
Yeah,
sustainable if you're not taking
yeah.
care of yourself.
I, I often have a better diet touring because I get really conscious of it. I mean,
Yeah,
let's just like without getting into too many details, when you're a musician, you have to be on stage and you've got schedules you've got to be on at this time or whatever. You have to kind of make sure your body is functioning
yeah,
because the last thing you want to do is get up on stage with fucking grumpy guts, man. It's terrible.
yeah,
And so yeah, as I got smarter, it was like my party nights where I was going to have a little bit of excess in my life. I would make sure that that would be like, okay, I've got 2 days off after this gig, so that's the one,
yeah,
where I let loose after the gig, crack the bottle of vodka and throw the cap away, kind of deal.
yeah,
But eating lots of salads, lots of whole grains, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Fight the
yeah.
scurvy off.
Oh yeah, 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 totally. Fresh fruit juice in the morning. Yeah.
That's great. So I wanted to chat about your biography again. Like
Yeah,
I
please. Yeah.
said, like, your biography. It's so It's so hard to write a biography. Did you write your biography on your website, or did someone write it for you?
Yeah, I mean, always feel self-conscious about it. It's a self-conscious one way or the other to be
Yeah.
writing about yourself or hiring a friend. Like I do have friends that are good writers or are accomplished journalists, and I feel like I could reach out and say, I'd like to hire you to write up this thing or help me out here. I'm just self-conscious about it one way or the other. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So in the
Self-conscious about the
one of the
process.
bios, I can't
Yeah.
remember which one it
Yeah.
was. I'm trying to look at it here. I can't see. It's a little too small. But one of your projects, it said you were talking about micro and macro socio-political.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Talk
Um,
about that.
I think that there is, especially with what I'm doing now, which is working with a lot of like resampled error and glitches, and I use like a lot of internal feedback and stuff that you're probably not supposed to do with your computer, I guess, to generate a lot of sounds. And I think that there is a kind of metaphor there or a parallel with using unwanted sounds and exploring this kind of negative space of uh, uh, sonically, the debris or the whatever else. Uh, to, I mean, I spent most of my professional career outside of art, working in emergency shelters, working in communities that were the negative space of society. When I've done a lot of my tours, especially doing most of the grinds, I've been playing in squats or illegal spaces or free parties in the countryside have been a huge thing. Um, and paid the price for that. It's sometimes as well. I mean, I remember playing in a squat party in Switzerland where the neighbors got pissed off and they came and locked all the gates so that we were basically like locked in and had to pick the locks to get our gear out afterwards. Um, Stuff like that. But so I mean, I think that there is that kind of parallel. And for many years, and I'm not totally sure if I've nailed it in this bio, but for many years I've been trying to figure out how to verbalize or write down, put into like written language, like what that kind of parallel really like means to me, because it gives a lot of those kinds of the non-musical sounds, the stuff that most people would clip. Like I'm the kind of person that will do a sample and it's got a bunch of digital artifacts and glitches in it, and I'll edit out all of the good parts and keep only the artifacts and the glitches, and use that as like a basis for sample. And so there's like an emotional resonance there for me because of my life experience out, in the rest of my life, and also in music and how I've presented it or traveled around. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard thing to put into words for sure,
Mm-hmm.
and it's such a, when you're talking about like a micro and a macro, it can just expand forever, infinitely.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so
Well,
to put that
and
kind of thing in a bio, it's like, fuck, like
well,
it's
it's
just like,
also
tell
it's
me more.
I've also always existed in this sort of uncomfortable, one foot in the sort of art world and one foot in the sort of music world. And I mean, music is an art and all of that, of course, but you know how there's a little bit of a separation. And I think a lot of that has to do around the immediacy of music creation versus like the amount of time it takes to make a painting or a video piece or whatever. There's a different kind of relationship with the medium for those reasons sometimes.
Yeah.
Performing music is like really immediate. You get immediate feedback. And most musicians are out there performing for a while and then they go into the studio and record afterwards. So the recording process and even the mastering, production, and editing process is still really educated by that like immediacy of the relationship with the audience. Um, and so I don't know. I try to do a long story short, I try to do a bio that somehow could be a music bio and an art bio at the same time.
Yeah.
Partly because I get sick of having to cater myself to this venue or that venue and just say like, I mean, you like it or you don't, book it or not, fund it or not, just like, this is what I'm doing. Yeah.
Right on. So let's talk a little bit about your sounds and your your source material that you're using. I
Yeah.
One of my favorite shows that I've ever been to was in Istanbul.
Oh yeah.
My buddy Attila took me, and it was a sampler, um, and he was playing with a small orchestra. So they had some woodwinds and some percussion, and he was sampling them and then mixing it all together. But at the beginning of the show, like an ambulance drove by, and like you could see it flashing through the windows at the back of the hall, and
Yeah.
you could hear it, and all the microphones picked it up. So he's doing this cool live sample, and like what would have been ruined by an ambulance coming through your show, this guy just started looping that in and using it, and I
Yeah.
was like, that's utterly impressive. And
Yeah.
it was one of the coolest live shows I've ever seen, and it was just little tiny shows, maybe 100 or 200 people there, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was amazing, the live sampling. So tell us a little bit about that. And you're making mistakes using broken equipment.
Well, yeah, I mean, okay, so right now the live performance is, I mean, a lot of samples that I've made through like glitchy radio or whatever else, other kind of sound stuff, skipping CDs and stuff, and then you put it. I do a lot of processing and editing, and then sometimes processing it live on the computer. But in the end, in the performance, it ends up being that my computer is effectively a DJ mixer with a bunch of noise samples loaded into it that I cut and splice, and then I do live looping and resampling of that, both within the computer and with an external sampler, because you can layer it with different kinds of effects and things like that. So that's the basic setup, but then the computer itself has feedback loops and all that built into it that will interrupt the sound or glitch it out, or add in nice little bursts of static and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So that's the technical process. Yeah.
So tell us. So I had Eamon McGrath on my podcast.
Yeah.
I think he was the first or second episode, I think.
Yeah.
And he was the one who introduced me to you. And we've never
Yeah.
met before. This is the first time I've actually seen your face.
Yeah,
So,
totally. Yeah, I saw you when we became Facebook friends. I think.
Yeah, we saw a little bit of that, but yeah.
Yeah.
But this is really our second conversation. We had a little convo before, like, hey, do you want to do this podcast and things? And so Eamon McGrath introduced me to you, and he told a great story that I clipped about touring. We were talking about DIY touring,
Yeah.
and he let's hear your side of this story, because I want to hear it from the horse's mouth.
Okay, so Eamon, Eamon has been like one of my number one supporters for forever. I love that guy, and one of my best friends. He got two stories mixed up. So he was telling a story about a roasting lamb, and I think that's probably the one you probably want to hear. So for years, you might have to edit this a little bit, because
all right.
There's a fair amount of setup that makes it good.
All right.
But yeah, so the for a few years I had been hooking up with and playing some shows with, like, I did a lot of tours in a style of like a few micro tours, right? So I'd meet up with some friends in France, and they'd help me organize a regional tour because they were like regionally connected. I'd go to Germany, do the same thing, Netherlands, Lithuania, wherever else I was going. That would be kind of it. I'd hook up with a friend, we'd do 3 or 4 shows together, and then I'd take a train somewhere else and do the same thing with another set of friends. And so in France, and I was meeting up with this group a lot called Nalov. N apostrophe And excellent band if you're into like improvised power electronics and paranoid screaming and really mutilated sounds. And they are, as far as you want to talk about punk electronics, they are the definition of it. Where they've got the main music maker. There's sort of vocalist and music maker. It's a duo. They're both named Matthew, so it makes it even more confusing and like obtuse. And the main music maker is writing his own code, building his own gear, and soldering it all together by hand.
Very cool.
And having to bring a repair kit along tour to do that, building his own drum triggers and stuff like that, and then adding in things that were just heinous, like an infinite distortion. So using like those infinite knobs you can have on controllers, and programming a computer so it actually just had no ceiling of gain that it would put out, basically until the sound card would melt or it would blow the PA system, basically. And so, I mean, they were a pretty aggressive live band, and we did, like, one of the first times I saw them was underneath a bridge just in this industrial area of Nantes. And they had like 2 oil drum fires like burning on the side beside the band, and it was just wild scene.
Beautiful.
And so one time they say like, okay, when you're done your tour, we're having a free party. So like in the tradition of the French free parties, you just go into the countryside. Nobody pays to go there, but they might put money in a hat for all the gas money for the bands and the sound system and stuff, right? Mathieu, the vocalist from Nalov, had a farm. He actually worked kind of as a winemaker. So he had a vineyard, but like very ghetto vineyard. Like he'd managed to get like a small plot of land for pretty cheap, and like a farmhouse that had like no, really cold, drafty, old stone farmhouse. God knows how old it was. But he was living out there and growing grapes, making wine, and doing this kind of art project. And so he was going to host it on his land. And I was originally touring with a live drummer. So I was doing noise cut-ups with acoustic drums. And the drummer was done the tour. We played our last show together in Caen, not too far north from where this farm was. And then that drummer had to take off and go home. And I was invited to do a solo gig, as part of this free party. So I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. I'll do that gig. I go to Paris, then fly home right afterwards. That's a great way to end it. So good thing the drummer didn't come, because when I showed up at the train station, the nearest train station to the farm, one of the Matthews came and picked me up, the musician one, computer programmer, and he's like, I hope you're okay hitchhiking. I was like, okay. So we would have, if the drummer could have made this gig, we would have been, yeah. So we're standing on the side of the road hitchhiking in, and sure enough, we get a ride from the neighbors. The very neighbors that live right next door. They drive by, and they're this old French couple. They're speaking to me in like real countryside French, and I'd think that, it's just kind of funny because I've said like ne parle pas français, or like, like I can read a menu, I can read a map and directions, but that's about my French skills. So they're talking to me, and I'm kind of answering like, I don't know what you're saying, and they're just continuing to talk to me. And then I lean over to Matthew in the back seat and say like, what are they talking about? And he's like, man, their country accent is like so thick I can't follow what they're saying. So we get to they say, can you give us they basically want to give us a tour of their farmhouse before they actually drive us next to where we're going. So we say, okay. So we come in, we have some of their homemade wine and some cheese and stuff, and it was quite lovely. And then they give us the tour of the farmhouse, and this guy's still talking. The husband is still talking in French. We don't know what he's saying. Matthew's still as confused as I am. He's bringing us around the house, and he takes us into the area where he butchers all of his meat, and he's just showing us his knives and stuff, but we can't really understand what he's saying. I think he was trying to show us where he's butchering his meat, but we're like looking at each other. What's going on here? So
we could get fed or die.
Totally. But eventually, they do manage to make some communication. Matthew says, we got to go set up for this party, but you two are more than welcome to come over for the party later. So, and they did later. But So we go over, and the party was actually the next day, and it was an amazing party in the way that it was absolutely 100% DIY. I mean, the sound system was almost totally homemade. Like the plywood
Wow.
speakers hadn't even been painted yet. It was on this vineyard, like in sort of a little gully, so you could sit up on a hillside. They had a fire going. They all the produce that they made all the food with was grown either there or by the neighbors, that they brought it off the neighbors or sort of traded or whatever. They bought the lamb that ended up getting roasted on like a rebar spit over the fire. They bought the lamb and had it sacrificially killed, I guess. Not in like like they called it a sacrifice, but they just paid a farmer to kill the lamb. Like it wasn't, they're making it seem a little bit more than it was there. But so they get the lamb, is slaughtered the day before the festival.
They like, was it like a halal
No,
thing or
no,
okay.
no. These are like I don't know, maybe either atheists or pagan weirdos, probably.
Okay.
one of the two.
Yeah.
Probably a mix of that in the crowd. But so they're roasting the lamb, and then there were technical problems and stuff. But I mean, people brought homegrown weed from the Swiss mountains. They brought homemade acid. All the beer was made by somebody. The wine was grown made right on the vineyard we were at. Like everything was like zero commercial participation, basically. So it's an amazing feeling, but chaotic and anarchistic in a way. I mean, there were people that got so wasted and so messed up on acid. There was like a young woman who was trying to like roll into the fire, and people were like pushing her back, and she was like fighting them to get into it, and they did hold her back. There's this one woman that was like I saw a total player, and I kind of respect this. So I mean, she basically just disappeared to the bushes with like maybe 5 or 6 guys around the fire, just like one after another, just like going around and coming back. And there was like fist fight broke out. I played at like 4:30 in the morning. I got invited to do a release with the French label afterwards. It was all of the set, so that was good. But that was not the show I got paid in gas. It was the same crew.
Okay.
But we got paid in gas at a different show. We carried around a gas can in the back of the truck or the station wagon, and that's where we would like. We were driving through France. I had no shoes. They were destroyed in a rainstorm, and so I was barefoot. And the tour was just moving, the grind. So I didn't even have time to like go get shoes. So I'm walking around without shoes. Not the safest thing to be doing in a lot of urban environments.
Yeah.
And we would pull over to the gas stations, and we had a Coke bottle funnel that we'd put over the gas, and then it would take 2 of us to tip and pour this gas in. But for a time, this was especially because when I first started touring in France, 2009, the real like economic troubles that started in 2008 hadn't really trickled all the way down yet.
Okay.
And so I feel like I got in there just as things started to get pretty difficult. So my first tour in 2009, 2010, I did a couple of tours in 2010. And all 3 of those were, at least a chunk of them were in France. And you'd pass the hat at a DIY venue or a squat venue or a free party, and you'd end up with like 200-300 euros per act. Yeah. And we were all electronic musicians, so that's 200 or 300 euros per person.
Yeah.
And gas prices were not nearly what they are now. We'd either borrow a car or rent one, split the cost of renting one between the group of us. And so it was like I was flying back to Canada with like money in the bank, thinking this is amazing. And then over the years in France, as the economic changes trickled down, and a lot of collapse of financial
Everything.
collapse happened. Yeah. It was really apparent, because when I first started going to France, it was like we play to an audience of like 50 people, and they would like what we do, so they put 10 euros in the hat after every set, you know.
Yeah.
And then we get some share of the bar and stuff like that. We were making all that money, and then I was going back and playing shows to like, oh, there's like 100 people here now, but I'm making 100 euros instead of 300,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And it just literally is the fact that the people in the audience just don't have the money to pay out.
Yeah.
And it's not like personal or like, you know, they want to support, and they do what they can. And in flusher times, in earlier days, I mean, Pass the Hat tour in France could be almost better financially than playing the club circuit. Because if you're a relatively unknown niche artist like me, you're playing like, you know, you play a Wednesday night at some club, it might be established, but they're going to say, we'll give you a 75 euro guarantee and you can stay in the hostel upstairs. And that's fine. Sometimes you just need to get a meal, get a safe place to stay when you're going from point A to point B, try to make some new fans in the process. And that's all good. I've done that tons of times too. But the Pass the Hat show, you're getting like 300 euros. You're staying in someone's private home. They're going to show you around town the next morning before you have to leave, take you to a good breakfast spot and stuff. Like the choice is a no brainer, you know, in that respect.
Yeah. A lot of people who go on tour, they, especially when bands are signed or have not necessarily signed to a label, but have an agent or a manager who would then hire someone like me as a tour manager. Like, I think they like set them up on like, you know, kind of like a path to failure almost, with like these like just copy and paste ways of touring. It's like, okay, you're going to go from like here to here and here and here, and these are the dates you're playing, and then you're going to stay in a hotel here, you're going to stay in a hotel here, and there's no room for any kind of swaying from that. It's like, well, why don't we maybe only play, you know, 3 shows, and, you know, maybe book it ourselves, or like put any kind of thought or creativity into how you're going to tour. And like, what I respect about you and what I respect about Eamon and any other kind of DIY or touring musician is the creative ways that they tour and put on shows. It's not like a regimented style, and there's just so many other creative ways to make something sustainable other than, you know, like getting a big guarantee and playing as many shows as possible.
Well, I remember there's so many ways like that musicians get preyed on, and we get treated. We get treated as consumers as opposed to creators by everybody else except for probably the end user with their headphones on.
Yeah.
But like, it's like we get sold gear, we get sold you know, studio time, we get sold marketing packages, we get sold record deals, because record deals don't actually pay you money. You earn that money yourself. They lend you money for a startup. Like, that's not, they don't actually give you anything. Aside from, I suppose, like a vehicle to promote yourself. And I mean no disrespect to people that use that vehicle and make a career out of it, because we got to do. But the fact is it did not take long when I was young, because there's not a lot of, I mean, I grew up in Saskatoon, and Saskatoon is kind of known now as a hub for a lot of music, especially around in like Juno world and that kind of level of like Canadian popular music. It's a pretty hot spot, I think. I've been told. I haven't lived there for a long time.
The last like real Junos we had, Coulter Wall. He was one of the upcoming artists. He's from Saskatchewan.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for the isolation in the winters, for people getting really reflective and getting really deep into projects and stuff like that. So it makes sense to me a lot. And there's always been a lot of creativity and a big history of art in that part of the country. Now, what was I saying about, what were we saying before that?
I can't remember.
You get to edit this, right?
Yeah, we'll figure it out. I think we were just talking about touring and ways to tour, and you were talking about how
Oh,
artists get taken
yeah.
advantage of.
So early on, when you're like 17 or so and you're starting to play your first shows, like me and my friends would rent out like a community hall, like the classic thing,
Yeah,
right? But we were trying to make like electronic shows and free improv and noise and stuff like that. So we were definitely the weirdos in Saskatoon. Um, and we mixed with the crowd of people that were into like pavement, post rock, and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of crossover in that in our high school scene with that
yeah,
stuff. And so we were putting on, organizing our own shows, and then some local douche promoter shows up and says, "Hey kids, do you want to play this bar?" And then if they say we'll promote it and all this stuff, and but when you play the gig, you have to pre-buy 25 tickets, and then
yeah,
you get to sell those tickets and keep the profit. And immediately I was like, who do you take me for?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, like if there's one thing if you're paying to play when you all pitch money as friends and throw a community hall show that falls through. Okay, well, we all did it together,
yeah,
right? It's another thing to like rely on some douche's battle of the bands thing where he's like, I mean, honestly, most of these people were probably younger than I am now, but like some douche in their like
yeah,
late 30s, early 40s, like I am now, but that has no connection or idea of like
yeah,
what's hip, what kids want to hear, and in especially in those small communities, smaller cities in the 90s, those people tried to really just take advantage of all the kids coming up and playing in
yeah.
bands. Yeah,
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 it's interesting. I like because like you definitely see a lot of that, and whenever any business that is going to get a contractor to do work for them, right? Say you were opening up a restaurant and you wanted
yeah,
someone to do social media for you, right?
yeah,
You wouldn't go to like a management company to run your social media, but a lot of times that's what happens with artists. They get
yeah,
sucked into these weird deals where,
hmm,
it's like all the management or a label is doing is really like connecting the dots between artist and a subcontractor,
they're actually
right?
just they're actually just a barrier most of the time, though.
Yes.
They're
Yeah,
not even they don't need to
exactly.
connect the dots. They're just
Yeah.
standing in the way.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's a lot of that, and and a lot of it is like intentional, and a lot of it is unintentional, and maybe some people
Mhm.
have very good intentions, but they just don't know how to execute things. And so
Yeah.
yeah, and so like there's like the two reasons why like somebody who is like a service industry to an artist would do a bad job is one is for malpractice, and then the other one is
Mhm.
just because they're fucking evil, greedy bastards.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just like it's funny though because artists like get taken advantage of so much, and all these service industries to them are running the show. Where
Mhm.
it should be the artist manages them themselves and like manages their managers better. Like they're one of the things I'm doing with my not for profit is trying to like help artists have all these resources to kind of navigate that better and maybe not fall prey to these service industries that will cost you money or cost you like a percentage off of your total earnings.
Yeah.
It's yeah, it's a fucking crazy world out there for artists, and getting in because you have to do business with people at some point, right? Like
Mhm.
if you want to
Yeah.
grow, or even if it's just a local promoter somewhere, or if it's somebody who's going to like manage your entire career on your behalf, right? Like it,
Well, I mean, I've even seen like local small bars and restaurants. Like it's not even big business. It's just like that small scale. You still see this attitude present where if you play at a bar, a lot of the time you're like, especially in North America, you're like, okay, no drink tickets, but
yeah,
you have fucking draft beer.
yeah,
I'm serious. Like
yeah,
like you can't offer at least a couple of drinks to somebody
yeah,
that's practiced, they've honed their craft,
hmm,
they've come in, they've filled the space with their friends
yeah,
who are all paying to be there and putting money into the bar. and
the
like you
venue is
can't
getting free beer from the supplier
from a
because they're
corporate
putting on
sponsorship.
shows, and they won't even give you free
Yeah,
beer, you know?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think that there's probably a couple of venue owners in Canada that think that I'm pretty pretentious in some ways because,
I think you're
or
fucking
or
right on the money, dude.
but or difficult because if I've been caught in a bad mood and I get fucked around by a venue, I will definitely bring it up.
Yeah.
And like I'm not gonna take someone outside or whatever, but I'm not gonna fight you over money or anything like
Yeah.
that. But I'm going to let you know, and I'm going to be honest about my opinions about your establishment
Yeah.
afterwards. If friends of mine say, "Oh, like I mean, I've had promoters that have really dicked me around," and I could tell you actually a really good story about this, and I don't necessarily 100% mind name dropping either, but no one would be super famous anyways, but where like yeah, I mean you have to call people on that crap, and if
Yeah.
your friends if you care about your friends and they say I need to go play a show in this city, who do you recommend? I'm not recommending those people.
Yeah.
And if my friend says, look, I just need a gig so that I can have a hotel room or a place to stay for the night, I'm still going to tell them honestly, well, okay, yeah, I mean, you can play there, but expect this treatment
Yeah.
from these people, right?
Yeah.
And in turn, there's venues and crews in the world that I've played with. Friends of mine, good friend Arma in Lithuania, everybody will know him just by his first name, probably. Amazing person to work with. I've worked with this crew of goths in Estonia for these parties called Beats from the Vault. I just want to like name drop some real positive things.
Cool.
The Nelov crew that put on those things for me were really good. There's amazing venue in Amsterdam, Oki. Like I'll brag about these things for them or promote these all day because the way that they treat artists is amazing. And I would recommend anybody work with those folks.
Yeah.
But when it comes to bad treatment, I mean, we got to protect each other.
Yeah.
As
Absolutely.
far as spreading the word, yeah.
It can be so damaging, man. Like if you run into, like, if you say you're doing a regional tour and you have a regional promoter that's going to do it for you, and you like artists put so much money and time and effort into a tour, even if it's just maybe 4 shows in a regional space, they're still getting on a plane and going or driving and getting there, spending tons of money, resources, time. And if that local promoter or those local venues aren't on board and aren't up, putting in their work for their cut, it's devastating.
Like I basically am I don't need a lot of money as far as a guarantee for a gig I play, especially if it's a local show and it seems like a lot of fun. I mean, next weekend I'm playing a friend's birthday party in his basement.
Yeah.
With a couple of other bands, and it's all a bunch of other audio nerds, so I know it's going to sound good. This technical side is going to be good, and I might make $0. I might make some money depending on how the hat goes when it gets passed around and how people are feeling. And I don't mind that kind of agreement, but I don't want to get openly ripped off.
Yeah. I tour with a band, and we'll play like anywhere between like a couple hundred capacity rooms to like 1,000 capacity rooms on our tours. And we've played like little parties or backyard parties, and
it's awesome.
And like
the house party is one of the most
everybody's
fun.
buying merch. You're getting fans that you normally wouldn't be put in front of because they're not buying a ticket to your show. They're there for like the party, or they're friends of people. And it's so rewarding on another level. And I did a video the other day on especially going into like a cold market, like somewhere you haven't played before, and like ways of going into and expanding your touring market, and finding value outside of like a guarantee or what you're making from a show or your merch.
Yeah.
And I think artists have to look at that too, and it's something that you've talked about, whether you did it on purpose or it was just like a natural survival instinct, you've done. But there's ways to make your tour successful in other ways other than the guarantees and the money you're making from the show and merch.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
filming a documentary while you're doing it, or even just social media.
Hmm.
It's kind of, you got to
I
be
don't think.
creative. It goes back to the creative
Yeah.
ways of putting on shows.
There's also nothing wrong with being a little bit assertive, not like aggressive, but like okay, so my rider, I guess, for being booked, like if I'm doing stuff with friends that I've worked with before, we barely even have to talk about this stuff. It's like we
Yeah.
exchange a couple of text messages a couple days before the show to confirm technical details, or I'll let them know if something is going to be extremely different from the last time I was there.
Hmm.
But
Does your rider just say barrel of gasoline on it, and that's what
No,
it says
no.
on it?
When it gets to the fee,
Yeah.
if I'm booking with a bigger organization or people with budget, the fee always or often says in proportion to what other artists are being paid. Maybe it's my background working in union jobs and those kinds of things, but like I don't think there's inherently anything more valuable about what one musician does over another. And I don't even necessarily think that the crowd matters or the style matters or how famous the person matters or anything like that. It's still work that somebody is doing, and they've put a lot of practice and time and work
Yep.
into it. So, from that perspective, I'm like, if one guy makes one amount of money, I'll make the same amount of money. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. And I've lost gigs over that,
Hmm.
where people have said like, oh well, we've paid this fancy headliner that's a big art star right now, and we can't afford to pay everybody €1,500 or $1,500. I'm like, okay, I mean, we can negotiate maybe something that's fair, but
Yeah.
like if you have the budget to pay one person that, then you have the budget to pay other people that. And so that's usually been what my fee is just on par with everybody else.
Yeah.
Is what I try to ask for. I mean, that's obviously the world is not ideal, and I don't always get what I ask for.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's worth sacrificing. You don't want to die on that hill if you've got a good opportunity. Like I got to tour with Merzbow. I got to open for some people that were people that I've listened to since I was 15 years old. And yeah, there's definitely some sacrifices I'm willing to make. But I also, that's generally how I start the negotiation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at you being fair. You're never gonna make it in the music business doing that.
Yeah, totally. But hey, I mean, one of my favorite festivals to play, which was a nightmare and totally a chaos when it came to some technical stuff, but an amazing festival for outsider music is ZNFI, which is in Slovenia, and it sort of branched off of a long-running experimental music festival based out of Ljubljana, but now they move around to different cities in Slovenia. And okay, so the attitude is basically everybody gets paid the same, although some people have a higher travel allowance than others
Yep.
because if you
Yep.
drive from further away, you have to pay more to get there. So
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Everybody eats at the same kitchen. The food is prepared for everybody. Everybody eats the same thing. Generally speaking, they'll just rent out an entire hostel and everybody stays in the same place.
Yep.
And there's no headliners. There's no such thing as headliners. The set order is based on the artist's availability and the flow of the night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like comedy does that a lot with
Yeah.
their set times. Like when you go to, like, especially places that are like kind of hubs for comedians to just kind of come like open mic it kind of.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like there's no set time. They'll do the set time like, at doors when all the comedians are there, and they're like, okay,
Yeah.
here we go. Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been One of the things that I've been kind of working on, and in the not for profit that I'm working on, is just different ways of getting artists fair payment, and getting artists different kinds of reward for their shows and making things easier. Like I talked about, like, like even like like doing, like, I did logistics on the Pan Am Games, and then I kind of got into like systems that kind of automate processes, and like databasing and all that stuff. And I'm like,
Hmm.
how can I apply this to musicians touring? And I've kind of come up with this way to use like like automated ride shares for artists
Hmm.
who are, you may not be touring together, but on this date and this date, this artist is going from here to here, and this artist is going from here to here. And like
Hmm.
there's ways to automate this entire thing.
Well, that's
And
cool because ride shares has been big for me because often playing those micro tours, it's like, oh, we're playing Berlin and Frankfurt together,
mhm,
but then after that we're not, and I'm touring on my own, and you've got a band van. If I pitch in for the gas on this trip, can I just hop in the back?
right,
I've done that tons of times, and to have some sort of automated system could be quite awesome.
right.
Or yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's there's so much that can be done. And like I've been planning this for about 10 years before I've even
yeah,
spoken about it publicly. And there's just so many cool little features and resources that I really want to share with everybody. And it, all these things that people like you have been working on and I've been working on a micro scale, make it available to everybody, and
yeah.
instead of my individual effort and your individual effort and the individual efforts of all of these regional promoters, you can go to this like resource that's open to everybody and have at it, because really all of these things are a Google search away if you know how to Google, or a
Yeah.
chat GPT search away. But to have it all condensed for artists who are touring to,
Hmm.
it's there's so much stuff you can take from the DIY scene and the small
Hmm.
artists that have been doing this for, you've been doing this for what, over like, oh, well over a decade now.
I mean, I really did start organizing concerts locally and playing little out of town gigs in the 90s.
Yeah. Oh shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the three
Yeah.
decades. So
Yeah.
yeah, and same with me. I started when I was 16. I threw my first punk show.
Yeah.
And like when, and then when I got into like the industry side of things, it's always like, why is this? Why are we fucking doing this? Like, it's such an epic waste of everybody's time and resources, and it's just, you know,
Well, you
the
also have
bands
like,
walk away with nothing, and there's this like all
mhm.
this money that's been just like thrown everywhere. It's like, let's trim the fat and, you know let
Well, you
people have
have,
success at every level.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, any art ecosystem, like art is just an ongoing dialogue.
Hmm.
And when you're a musician or any other kind of art, you're contributing to that dialogue. And I think also to try to put more importance on yourself than that is egotistical. But everybody contributes to that dialogue, whether it be like the guy that has, you know, releases, just to friends, or whether it be someone like me that has like some sort of cult or niche thing going on, or whether it be somebody like Eamon, who's I think quite successful at what he's doing at his level,
Absolutely.
and then all the way up the most famous people. We're all just contributing to this dialogue,
Hmm.
and you can't tell me that famous producers aren't sitting there mining ideas from unknown people all the time. Like they're going through and listening to stuff and being like, oh, look at this really interesting thing that somebody that no one really knows about has done.
That's
What if we?
that's how the entire music industry has
Yeah,
operated since the
yeah.
50s.
So
Like
what
like a
happens if
band comes
you?
around
Yeah,
and they're popular and it's a hit,
yeah,
everybody replicates that, and that's what the entire mainstream music industry since the 50s and radio,
yeah.
it's
But
been.
even that, it's not just it's like not just replicating the hit, but it's like I don't know. Let's use a big example. Elvis, his manager going around and buying up, the rights to blues songs for really cheap.
Or stealing
Um,
them.
or stealing them outright,
Yeah,
knowing that people don't have the funds or
yeah.
whatever to legally fight
No, it
it or do
happens.
it. Yeah,
You're
yeah, and
absolutely
so
right.
and that happens a lot even in I mean, it was really weird to me when noise music became somewhat popular in the 2000s when like Sub Pop released Wolf Eyes and stuff. And so I got to play with Wolf Eyes years and years later. And if I'm perfectly honest, I've never been really like a huge fan of their work, but I got to say they were really, really nice guys. They did a good show and they were incredibly nice, like no ego attached to them. They were fun to hang out with. Yeah, they didn't like introduce themselves, be like, we're Wolf Eyes. They were just like, hey, we're so and so. I can't actually even remember their names right now. That's a bit bad, but um, uh, and all of a sudden you saw like even like hardcore shit was being like ripped off for it, like stylistically at least, in sort of more mainstream stuff, I suppose. And now I'm bringing that up, and I, like a total douche, I can't actually present an example right now. Yeah,
It
yeah.
yeah, well, like to go back to your main point, like when like, part of any producer or label is all about, discovery, right? And
Hmm.
you have to be up on things. So like, and it may not be like, as I go back, is like, it may not be malicious, but it's like, when you hear something, and you vibe with it, it's hard not to use that as inspiration in something. You
Totally,
know what I mean?
totally.
Like, so it's like, yeah, like it's like there's this, like, and like, where do you draw the line of, you know of that? Like, it's hard to put into words, like
I,
the inspiration versus stealing. And but like, it's like, yeah, so like I agree,
well,
like when a big producer who has this huge platform is already successful, instead of like taking calling that artist being, hey, I love what you're doing, let me produce you, they're like, oh, I'm working with this artist, we'll do that. Like,
yeah,
there's all
yeah,
sorts of
yeah.
shit like that too.
But so I mean, one of my biggest enemies through my entire life,
Ooh.
and because of what we were talking about around streaming services and automated screening of intellectual property and stuff, is I feel like one of my biggest adversaries has been intellectual property rights.
Yeah.
I think we need a incredibly deep reevaluation of the very concept of intellectual property rights. Um, I don't think there's anything wrong with people sampling my material. I
Yeah.
don't think there's anything wrong with people sampling anything.
Hmm.
I do think that there is a very big conceptual difference between just bootlegging somebody and sampling and remixing or recontextualizing.
Yeah.
But you know how art works. Sometimes you just take something and you put it in a new context, and the new context completely changes the thing.
Yeah.
So sometimes a sample doesn't actually need to be modified in
Yeah.
order for it to have its meaning changed.
Yeah.
And so we need to have like a very, very serious discussion. And as a message to all of my peers out there who are freaking out over AI and all of that stuff right now, the music industry has lied to us so many times and has gotten us to agree to ridiculous copy protection and intellectual property right laws and ridiculous amounts of time that copyright stays valid. I mean, look at Disney
Yeah.
and how characters that they developed over 100 years ago are still tightly locked into copyright agreements and intellectual property. As artists, we let the companies make us paranoid and scare us into making it so that now every time I release my own music on tape and I dub the tape at home, I'm paying in every one of my releases. I have to pay tax money that goes into a pot that's only shared by record labels and the most rich people that are already involved in the industry. Why do I have to buy a blank CD and pay Nickelback and Alanis Morissette an anti-piracy cut, which mostly probably goes to their management and labels anyways? Why do I have to pay them a cut to release stuff that actually legally even is completely 100% my own intellectual property? And we let ourselves get talked into this stuff repeatedly, and I think we're letting ourselves get talked into it again by getting into this weird semantic debate about what inspiration is and what it is different in a computer versus a person, when really the whole argument is being used as a way and will be used as a way to, I guarantee it, strengthen intellectual property even more. I'm in a position right now as a sample-based musician where there's legitimate legal ways that you can sample. If you
Yeah.
there's lots of court precedents where if I press a song to vinyl that's all made up of other people's snare drums and kick drums and vocal samples, that could be completely legal depending on the audience I'm marketing to. If there's no crossover market that would interfere with other people's sales, then they can't claim that I took away from their sales. There's all sorts of precedents that have been set up legally to allow what I do. What I do, using samples, is not illegal. But I cannot put my stuff on Spotify. I can't put my stuff on streaming services. Bandcamp will let me put it up there, but the traffic that Bandcamp gets versus all of the lazy ass fuckers in the world that only listen to Spotify is ridiculous, and it is completely also a vast form of censorship and sampling forever, and not just sampling, but folk music is sampling. You're learning a song, you're playing the same song everybody else played, you're putting your own spin on it. There's no fucking difference between it. Just one instrument is a computer, one instrument is a guitar or a flute or whatever else. And we've gotten ourselves into this box where, because of these automated filters around intellectual property, we are eliminating a large and important part of the artistic dialogue that should be happening, which always happened, as I said, before sampling, with folk music and every other kind of music. How many people, when they learned how to play guitar, were listening to other people's riffs and saying, oh, I'll do something like this, even if they didn't play the exact same riff? In my mind, I have a really hard time differentiating between sampling and that from an ethical standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. And, whether it is like a recording of somebody's work that you've cut up, transformed, and made into something new, or whether it's somebody physically playing a guitar that is the same riff as someone else, it's in my opinion the same thing.
Well, and I
definitely agree with you there. But
I want to add one.
Oh,
can I put?
Sure.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I wanted to say, because there's sometimes you get into these arguments about the intellectual property rights and whatever, and the average person that's not invested in doing their own music or art or whatever, they tune out. They're not interested in it. And for people out there that are listening to your podcast that want a way to resonate with that, think about intellectual property rights and medicine, because they're the same kinds of laws and the same kinds of attitudes that prevent us from having an artistic dialogue and a cultural dialogue, which is really important, also prevent us from doing things like giving people insulin at reasonable amounts of money, or making generic drugs to save people's lives, and stuff like that. So challenging intellectual property in art, in my mind, has that larger political implication. Anyway, so I just wanted to get that.
Shout out Pharma Bro. Wow.
Yeah.
So this is really interesting. I just had a video taken down. I did like a 2-hour live stream, and I was talking about the technical aspects of the Super Bowl halftime show. And I'd taken the music out. I'd paused it and used short clips, and I'm like, here's the rigging of this, and here's why they used this camera angle, and they're hiding this set change, or they're hiding this quick change where she put on a new coat, and I was explaining all that for people who are, because this is a music industry podcast, so producers watch it, technical people watch it, and it got banned. And I wrote a letter. I'm like, this is why what I did falls under fair use, and and it's just an automatic strike, or not. It wasn't a strike. It was a flag, an ID claim, or whatever they call it. But it's not even But the problem in that, there's a few layers of this discussion to have when we talk about it. One, um,
Yeah.
the law, right? The law is one thing, and then who is the publisher? That's another thing that's super gray,
Yeah.
because
Hmm.
yeah, you're publishing something online, but you're publishing it on somebody else's platform, technically making them the publisher, and you are a writer or an editor. So,
Hmm.
a lot of times with like YouTube or SoundCloud or whatever, whoever is like technically by the eyes of the law the publisher, they just, if they get like an ID claim or like an IP dispute, they will just cut off the video with no with no more action or investigation, because they don't have the time to investigate. As a company, that now they're losing revenue. YouTube's losing revenue by hiring people to like look into and investigate these things. So they just
Hmm.
have some form of algorithm look at it and do it. So
Hmm.
there's the court, the laws, there's the who is the publisher, and then there's just the moral social code of it all, and like what do artists feel is right, what do you know maybe some people will think it's fine. It was like, use my shit, I don't care. And then other people are like, no, this is mine. Oh, I lost you.
I lost your video, but I can still hear you.
Okay, oh, now you're back. There we go. Hi. So, and then the third thing, yeah. So the third thing is the artists themselves, and whether they're okay with people using their stuff or they're not okay with people using their stuff.
And then I want to just say from like this is from the perspective of like an anti-capitalist idealist. Uh, does it matter if the artist is okay with it? From the perspective of that artistic dialogue. And now there's lots of examples of in
That's an
music
interesting
history
question.
of artists like riffing on each other in order to make fun of or have a beef with or challenge each other. I mean, rap music, of course, is full of this.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, what would you, if you want to get really strict about intellectual property too, what would you do about rap lyrics? Because most rappers rap in like series of references.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and okay, I'm a bit going off the rails, but I think that the root of the problem is economic, and then our fear of housing security, food security, and all that kind of stuff. It goes down to that, right? And I think places that have gotten away from this, there's places in the world where you can become like an artist of the state. Like, so instead of grant money being just you have to apply every time you do a project.
Yeah.
There's some granting systems in other places where if you and they don't give this to anybody, you have to apply for it. But at a certain point in your career, like maybe mid-career, middle age, or whatever, you can start applying. You have a body of work, and then you might get declared to be basically like an artist that gets funded by the state.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people that have gone this route that do really radical artwork that's very controversial in the mainstream culture that they live in, because it's chosen by a jury of peer artists, not politicians.
Okay.
But and I'm sure there's a lot of politics to this that I don't understand. Because I don't speak all these local languages or whatever, and I see things in windows and snapshots while traveling around. But the idea being that, like, I got a friend in Slovenia that his bills are paid, like his housing costs, and he has like a food allowance that are paid every month, and then it's his responsibility to generate more of an income than that doing his artwork.
Yeah.
But if, for example, he has a really good month and then a couple of really bad months, he's still able to know that I'm going to be able to pay my bills and I'm going to be able to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes away a lot of those fears, that security is so important to human beings. If we're secure, like, because I can sit down with a lot of my friends that have very different opinions about sampling, and especially friends of mine in like rock music worlds and stuff like that will probably take exception to some of my stances. because they're out there playing real instruments, you know. But
Yeah,
yeah,
they all use the pentatonic scale, and
yeah,
they're
yeah. But
they shit on you. Yeah,
yeah, but we can have a conversation though, and I've had heated debates with friends about these topics, but they're not, when you take away the fact that neither of us are trying to rob each other of our housing and food security, then all of a sudden it actually becomes a very useful philosophical debate.
yeah,
And I've learned things and I've changed my opinion through talking to other musicians around these issues too. It's not like I started with the hardcore attitude and never changed or never, you
yeah,
know, whatever. It's developed over time.
yeah,
And I think a plurality of opinions makes us stronger. But it can be a weakness in a capitalist system where there's a really narrow way to the top. And so if we sit around criticizing it too long, we're going to miss our opportunities and we're never going to get that record deal.
yeah,
I've seen a lot of bands that were peers of mine try to move from DIY into a more commercially, like commercial business minded approach. And
yeah,
it's, to me, it's like, I don't think there's anything wrong with business paying the bills.
yeah,
But there's something weird about using what you learn in the DIY scene in those ethos, and then you use it to make a lot of money while taking a lot of the, you know, generating the hype and taking a lot of the gigs from other musicians that you were coming up with.
hmm,
And so it's one thing when people get famous and they bring people up with them. And I think that's what friends and peers do, you know. Even in the DIY scene, you're doing split releases with each other. So I'm going to gain some new fans in France, and you're going to gain some new fans in Canada, you know.
hmm,
But there are groups that I do think, I don't want to be too negative and name drop people that I in my life, and I won't. But where that they use all those skills that they learned through other people through the cultural dialogue, and then they used it in essence to, like, you know, uh, gain a lot of turf and then exclude others from accessing that. And
yeah,
now that I say that, I do think that that same thing exists in the publicly funded grant world, where you have people that are like, oh, I've just been getting like 100,000 grants every year, and now I can work as a gatekeeper for grants, you
yeah,
know, because I'm holding all this money. If people want to be involved in projects, they got to come talk to patients, you know.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting when you're talking about, well, you're talking about a lot. What you just said is a lot. There's so many things that
Yeah, I
we
know.
could go pick apart in that. But let's talk about the grant writing and the way that public funds are used to promote artists and to sustain artists and to grow culture, because it's such an important, grants are always a huge thing, and there's some different schools of thoughts on grants. Like everything from like it can make or break an artist's career if they
Hmm.
get or don't get them. And then I was chatting with buddy of mine named Guillermo, who was talking about, he's from Peru and they don't have any government grants there for art.
Yeah.
And he was saying, it was a double-edged sword and sort of a blessing in that aspect, because through the necessity of having to do it yourself came all sorts of amazing creative explosions
Hmm. Hmm.
and interesting ways of putting on art and making art and sustaining
Hmm.
yourself. So I've been to some countries as well where I've seen you know artists, like I've seen like state artists in some, like I spent some time in
It's not
Turkmenistan.
always a good,
Yeah, I
not
spent.
always a good idea.
Yeah. So I spent some
Yeah.
time in Turkmenistan. I was there for just shy of a year, and
Yeah.
they had like in the main capital city they had like one theater there, and it was basically just like
Yeah.
like a really strange place. Like it was nothing like I'd ever seen before, and like all of the like arts and culture there kind of made me a little uncomfortable. And like the president had his own like band, and that
Yeah.
and like
I think I've seen videos actually
yeah.
of
Oh,
that.
have you
Yeah.
really? Yeah, yeah.
Isn't
If
he
you
really into sports cars too, or something like that?
there, yeah. He's got
Yeah.
all sorts of weird and guns and
Yeah.
horses, and yeah, he's got all
Yeah.
sorts of weird videos online. Yeah, it's pretty hilarious. But like they have state artists, and
Yeah.
it's really strange because there anyways you like I one of the guys who worked for me had a like a metal band, and they couldn't even uh rehearse because that kind of stuff is like illegal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's there's definitely oh my god, I mean, to be a realist instead of an idealist, no matter what system you use in anything political or business, you need checks and balances,
yeah,
otherwise it's going to end up corrupt
yeah.
or terrible or yeah.
Yeah, and then on the other end of the spectrum, there's these like government grants, like say here in Canada, there's like all sorts of different provincial, federal, private, semi-private, like government private grants going around, and there's lots of money in Canadian arts. But there's also a lot of nepotism
I
and
have not seen much of that money, I got to be honest with you.
yeah.
Well, no, I mean,
Well,
and there is like I
have you
like
applied for it? Do you have a grant writer? How do you
I
apply for that stuff?
I can't
You can't be
generally
fucked to do it.
oh no, I can't afford a grant writer.
Okay.
I've gotten a couple of grants, but out of I think 13 or 14 tours in Europe and then Mexico and Japan and stuff, uh I got one of those tours was funded by a grant. The rest of them I did myself. I'm not opposed to getting the money,
Yeah.
but one of the things that happened with me, I think, is that early on when I was young, I probably wasn't as good at what I do at that time, just to be honest, because I was younger with less experience. But a lot of grants wanted you to be established enough. They're looking for
Yeah.
somebody with enough of a body of work to say, yeah, you go tour, do this thing, represent Canada.
Hmm.
And so now grants have refocused. Now that I am someone that's been working for almost 3 decades in Canada, and to be honest, I mean, well, I mean, okay, this is not a humble brag. This is a bit of a brag, I suppose. But I sent you, just for sake of conversation, just my record of performances over the while. And
Yeah.
do you know many other experimental sound
My
artists
finger
that
got
get from
sore scrolling through it, man.
yeah, but I
Yeah.
mean, do you know many other people that are in my niche that actually that are Canadian that actually presented their work that many times? Most people are going over and doing like one sexy artist funded festival and coming home. And I always thought that, okay, once I did all the grind, I would be able to say like, look, I mean, I'm already repping the country's art scene, now fund me,
Yeah.
right? I did this, it's set up, this is a no-brainer. And a lot of grants have been refocused to being for emerging artists now that I've been older.
Yeah.
So I got the shit end of the stick on both sides, to be honest. And part of it is not knowing how to describe.
You should talk to Eamon,
Yeah,
because you two are buds.
yeah,
About ask Eamon about V.
V.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's a grant writer, and she's a brilliant woman. And
Yeah.
yeah, do that.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
But yeah, sorry, my ass is getting sore. And we've been at this an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I don't want to end this conversation though, man.
Yeah.
I want to go. I want to keep talking to you because I really enjoy talking to you. I think you have so much really cool input. I didn't even scratch the surface of anything I wanted to talk about. I kind of like asked about the micro and macro socio and political stuff. I want to dive into that with you. I want to dive more into capitalism and like different structures of government and arts. And man, I really had the best time talking to you. I love what you're saying. Thank you for joining me. I think we should do a part 2 of this, maybe.
I'm into it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because there's so much to talk about, and I really, really enjoy talking with you and what you're doing and what you have to say. So thank you for taking the time to be with me today.
You're welcome, and thank you
I'm
for
really
having
glad
me on.
Eamon introduced us.
Yeah, it's a nice meeting. Yeah, I'm happy to do it again. I think I told you too. I'm at that point in my life where I'm not touring as much. I don't think I can physically do it. I got a cute little dog I got to take care of, so I
Yeah,
can't be out of town for too long, and all this stuff. So I'm at this point where I feel like I've had some pretty wild experiences, and I've had a bit of an interesting approach. I guess I
for
did it because
sure.
it's just what I did it because it's what worked for me. I didn't
Yeah.
know it was an interesting approach until I was sort of in it. And I want to tell stories. I kind of have.
Yeah.
I feel like that's something that I can contribute right now because I don't tour as much at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, like you kind of say you maybe just fell into that way of doing things. And it's because some people, you know uh, i guess work towards that. But
Hmm.
it's interesting that you just kind of naturally do it. And I think just your whole political uh belief system and ethos really kind of just guided that path for you to where you were. And like, it's super cool, man. I really dig on everything you do, and I'm a huge fan of not only the work you do, but also just you as a person.
Hey man, that means a lot. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
All right,
Don't know what
well,
else to
let's
say.
end this, and let's do this again. Let's all get in touch with you. We'll schedule it again. Before we go though, is there anything that you want to plug, any projects you're working on?
Um, I mean, I want more and more people to listen to what Eamon and I did together. We have a project that's really taken like a lot of the beat-driven music that you could hear in a club that I used to do, even though it was kind of messed up. A lot of the energy of that has gone into tracks that Eamon and I did. We did an album called under a band name called Assault Charge with a self-titled album. It's on Bandcamp, and there's a couple of tracks on Spotify.
There's
But I
more.
would love,
I think there's yeah, and Bandcamp. You have the full album on
yeah,
there.
yeah, and the full album on Bandcamp. Any money that it's on my Bandcamp, Jacob Audrey Taves Bandcamp, and any money that I get from that, I'm giving to some causes in Ukraine. So
Very
haven't made a
cool.
lot.
Very
I
cool.
haven't made a lot of cash from that, but I have some friends that used to before the pandemic and before the war that would host me for concerts in Western Ukraine, and they were supplying like first aid gear and stuff for the battlefield paramedics. And so, like that album didn't. It's not a. We're not a rich group of musicians, but we were able to put at least a little bit of money towards that, and anything that comes in for that album in particular, I'll keep doing that. When it builds up to a certain amount, I'll shove that money over to a good cause that way.
That was one of the things I had to listen to when you were sending me your stuff. I was vibing on it for sure. It was very cool, and it's
Yeah,
cool for
it's
Eamon to kind of get into that world too, being a guitarist.
yeah, no
You
guitar.
know,
He made a rule too. He said, I asked him at one point, we did one track where I was like, what would be really awesome because we did this one track that had a real like ministry
yeah.
vibe, and I was like, as soon as like when this part comes in, like we need like screaming guitar solo, and he's like, no guitar. There's no going to be no guitars on this album, and so then from that point on, where I was like, actually, you know what? That's super interesting. We're
It
working
is. It
together.
definitely is.
Let's make a rule: no guitars. And if we ever do perform that stuff live, and I hope we have the opportunity, we're gonna take it on as like you would see like a hip hop duo or like Suicide, like that band with Alan Vega, where you've got like just the DJ or electronics person and the front person kind of combo. Yeah,
Very cool.
yeah.
Well, Jacob Taves, thank you so much.
Hey, Jacob, thank you.
All right, I'll be in touch, my friend. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
You're watching the Hostile Takeover podcast.